Hello and welcome to 1,000 Cuts, female editors on stitching stories and creating magic. I'm Ebony Adams, Manager of Public Programs for WIF. This special conversation is a partnership between Women in Film and MPEG, the Motion Picture Editors Guild. It's part of an incredible slate of programming comprising our WIF TV Summit, which is devoted to shining a spotlight on the female creatives changing our media landscape and deserving of industry recognition. Today's exploration of the magic of motion picture editing promises to be a fascinating and illuminating one. And as we look forward to the 2021 Emmys race, we hope that you seek out the work and projects you'll be hearing about. And if you're an Academy voter, we encourage you to vote for women. Before I introduce our special guest and our moderator tonight, I'd like to welcome Dorian Harris from MPEG to say a few words. Dorian?
Thank you, Ebony. I'm Dorian Harris. I'm the co-chair of the Women's Steering Committee at Motion Picture Editors Guild, which is a national labor organization currently representing over 8,000 freelance and staff post-production professionals, also known as IATSE Local 700. It is the largest of the 13 below-the-line Hollywood locals working in film production today. The Women's Steering Committee at Local 700 is part of the Diversity Committee, which was formed in 2014 to address the representation of women, BIPOC, and LGBTQ members within our guild. The percentage of women in Local 700 is about 25%, a statistic that has remained virtually unchanged for many years. Tonight, we are happy to be part of the discussion with Women in Film and introduce you to 7 very talented editors working on some of the most distinctive television content this year. Thank you.
Thanks, Dorian. And now I'd like to introduce our panelists for today. Please welcome Amy Duddleston, editor for Mare of Easttown, Nona Khodai, editor for WandaVision, Joi McMillon, editor for Underground Railroad, Rosanne Tan, editor for The Falcon and the Winter Soldier, Michelle Tesoro, editor for The Queen's Gambit, Susan Vaill, editor for Hacks, and Shelly Westerman, editor for Halston. And leading our conversation is Kirsten Schaffer, Executive Director of Women in Film. Kirsten, I'll pass it to you.
Hi, everybody. It really is so cool to be here with all of you. These are some of my favorite shows from the last few months. A number of them obviously just started playing in May or even May. So I feel like I've just watched some of them really fresh, which is it's a great place to be in. I wanted to start just sort of by talking about the field a little bit. And Dorian just gave a statistic. I think 25% of the members in the ACE are women, and that's a much higher statistic than a lot of the other fields that we see. And I wanted to get your take around why editing has been able to bring in and retain women at a different rate than a lot of the other areas. And also looking at this group, I would say it's a pretty intersectional group as well. So women of color, queer women, white women, how is this all working? So I'm going to start with you, Amy.
Me?
Yes.
How is it all working? Well, sometimes sometimes I'm the only woman in the cutting room. I mean, sometimes I'm the only mom in the cutting room. Sometimes I'm the only queer person in the cutting room. It's the queer woman mom. It's, so it's not easy. Sometimes it's really hard. And it gets frustrating, and I do my best to try and bring other women into the cutting room. I mean, that's really, it's just something I try to do on every single show I work on. It's kind of my mission in life now. So
I think you're probably not alone in that mission here in this room.
No.
And so Joi, the same question to you, but also maybe like what still needs to change?
Ooh, that's a loaded question. It's one of the things that, like, I remember my first job on a film was under Terilyn Shropshire as an apprentice editor, and she went out of her way to make sure that she made room for apprentice editors, because a lot of times when you're new into the union, you kind of it's hard to get that like second assistant job or that first assistant job because you haven't been in a cutting room before. And so I think creating opportunities where you can provide a place for like someone to be an apprentice editor, I think is really key. Because to jump, I come from reality television, to jump right into a film as a second, I would have been unprepared. I hadn't done dailies, I hadn't done paperwork. And so I think, one of the things I always preach is opportunity and access. And if we aren't creating the opportunities for, these, to have more diverse cutting rooms and not giving people the opportunity, then it's going to stay the same. So that's one of the things I really, really, try to look out for other people trying to transition from reality or coming into, out to Hollywood who've never been here before, and providing a place where they can not only have access to opportunities, but then meet people that can, continue to further their career.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. That makes a lot of sense. Shelly, what do you think about this question?
When I first kind of got into the Ryan Murphy world a couple of years ago, there were 2 women in a sea of men. And over the past 3 years, we've turned that, and I would say it's about 70% women now. And the past couple of shows have been predominantly all women. Halston was all women, and after COVID, we had 1 man join us. So I think we made like a very specific effort to turn that.
Right.
And bring females in and give them opportunities. And like Joi said too, there's a very big push to do apprentice editor positions to get people in.
And Nona, what are you seeing in this sort of part of the field?
I mean, it's interesting because when I started as an assistant, I was, when I first started, I was in a non-union kind of, I did like Hallmark Movie of the Weeks, and we actually had 2 women editors, and it was really lovely actually, because the first editor I ever worked with was a woman, but everyone else was men, like all men. And then my first union job was on a movie, and I was the only woman in the office, I think. And it was super bro-y. And you learn real fast that you have to kind of keep up with everybody. And from then on, it was a lot of like, for about a decade, I just primarily worked with men. And then I started to work with more women, like in television, there was more women. And then just recently in the last 5 years, there's been more than 1 woman editor on shows. And on the current show I'm on, there's all women editors. So that's a change. So I see the change, it's happening. So it's really nice to see actually. So.
Right. And how about in the Marvel world? What is it feel the same that everyone else is describing? Like it's been really male centric, but we're starting to see more women come in.
Marvel's actually trying to get really diverse editors and assistant editors and just people around post to come in. But still, sometimes I see maybe the VFX side of things are moving slower, but they are trying. And I think even when I first started many years ago in reality, it was, a lot of men, a sea of men and with Hawaiian shirts. And I was like the only one that looked the most different. And then moving into scripted world, I'm usually the only woman or, person of color. And just over the years, I think, we're doing better with diversity and there are more women and more moms. I remember working on shows where I brought my son in one day and I'm trying to eat, but my son is fussy, but no one around except for one person who was dad who said, "Hey, can I carry your son for a bit so you could eat?" It was the only person who understood what was going on. And it was nice. It was just like, oh my God, that's the dad. But everybody else was just, it was all bros. And, but again, I think diversity is moving towards the right path. So
Michelle, what, has your experience been the same? And what do you like, if we're ever to get to parity, to like 50% women, representative of all of our diversities around race and orientation, how are we going to get there?
I mean, I don't know if I have the answers to that. I'm just an editor, but but I think, when I came in, I'll echo what Nona said. I mean, I came through television, and I don't know whether I was just blessed with really nice people, but they were already, I mean, I worked with a lot of crews that were fairly even. So to me, I was like, oh, this is great. You know, I felt welcomed. There was a lot of women. There were, I mean, I think generally I was always maybe the only person of color for sure. And I don't think I got to a place where I felt like, oh, you know, I'm not the only person of color, until I started working with Ava. And I think her initiative of using array crew and really just making it a point, I think will help, you know, definitely. And just having that choice. I mean, I feel like I was lucky that the people who bumped me up early in my career were, you know, Rodrigo Garcia and Alan Poole. And, you know, I mean, there you go. You know, and I think when Amy and I met, we were on In Treatment, which at the time when these ideas of diversity and things like In Treatment was one of the shows that was listed that had more people of color and people that are in the, you know, LGBTQ community and, you know, women and, you know, it was already diverse. So I think if we just keep doing that incrementally and finding other ways to bring people in, like, you know, internships and apprenticeships and things like that. And you have to make a conscious decision, you know, every time when you have the power to choose.
Susan, you are on a show that is really, you know, tackling so many parts of this issue head on. And I wonder if the sort of the conversation there is any different about how to get to parity.
That's interesting. I mean, it actually wasn't part of the conversation because they made it such a priority. It was just so obviously part of the storytelling and the crew and the post department. It's interesting though, because it is a show about mentorship and I just, you know, was constantly struck by how important that is and how it's good to be challenging sometimes as a mentor and also to create opportunities when you can. And during the pandemic, I wound up doing a lot of mentoring phone calls and I was interviewing assistant editors for my new show. And I was really saddened how many female assistants I talked to who had never worked with a female editor before. And some of them reached out to me specifically because they were like, I've only worked with male editors. And I'm like, you know, I only really assisted male editors when I first got started in TV. And it was, I had started actually in documentaries, which was a much more female parody world. And going all the way back to film school with Kate Amond, who was my editing teacher there, who's an amazing documentary editor legend. And I found the documentary world to be extremely, you know, just equitable in terms of directors and editors. And then TV, not so much. When I got to Shondaland though, she really created a space for a lot of women to have opportunities like above the line, below the line, and really wanted to see things happen for women. And that was just awesome. Like it was so awesome. Yeah, because they're, you know, I'm sure we all who were working in the 90s and the early 2000s had our fun stories, you know, like have been talked about in Hacks. But I do try to make an effort to connect women with other women. And I love that people like Kate Haight and Jamie Nelson Pedrosa they both are doing these initiatives like Women in Editorial and working with editors of color and trying to connect people to each other and promote people who are minority, but like, let's get them into the majority. And God, that's awesome. And so I utilize the tools that they're providing, which is great. On Space Force, we were looking for another editor, and I only sent that call out to like an email list of women comedy editors that I'm a part of. That's awesome. I just blasted that email list today with a show I'd heard about. And it's just so gratifying to be like, because that's also comedy is a field that, you know, There's
Mhm.
stereotypes that women, people, I can't tell you how many times I've heard, just can't find a woman comedy editor. And I'm like, really? Here's 20. Like, okay.
Right.
And that's what this email list came out of, because we were like, we have to promote each other and support each other and just jam these jobs out to each other. And so it's such a good feeling to do that, because it's still, editors, it's a good world for women, but we just need to make it better.
One thing I'm heartened by in listening to all of you talk is that, Shonda's been in the mix for a long time making this happen. Ava's been working on it for over a decade. Ryan Murphy's been in it. Barry's in it. And so like, it's building, right? So there was a foundation, I think, that started, and it feels like it's growing, and more people are getting in the mix and caring about this. That is what gives me hope that we're going to get to some higher numbers here before, soon. We'll just say soon. I want to dive into each of the projects you've been working on. I just finished Mare of Easttown, and I'm a girl who grew up in a mid-Atlantic state, so that accent, that dialect is really meaningful and significant. And I'm wondering, Amy, we talk often in editing about, at least on the Q&A side, around picture editing, but in this case, I think that the dialogue and the dialect editing is a huge part of what makes the show work. How'd you do it?
How did I do it? Oh God, I don't, you just follow Kate Winslet's lead, and you, like everybody on the set did, pretty much. I mean, I was like, the first time I heard her, I was in shock. I mean, it was truly shocking, like Wooder and hoagies and all of that. But, part of making that show, what it was the dialect and just making it feel like the place where it was taking place. I mean, it was shot in the place where it's luckily, like, everything was right there. It took place in that town, and Aston, PA. And it was pretty remarkable, bringing all of those elements together of just like the small town, of like those images, of the sounds of the people. My assistant and I had to travel to Pennsylvania to visit and work with the director at one point, and we were in a restaurant that wasn't playing music, which is like a really rare thing. And we took our phones and recorded the people talking for some walla, because it was just unbelievable. We're like, this is gold. It was just a unique experience, and all of those accents and everything. It was, I had to check and make sure that they were, the showrunner Brad is from there, so he would just tell me if somebody said something, if they lost their line. Like Angari, who plays Mare's daughter Siobhan, she's Australian, so she would lose her words sometimes, but I don't know, they all kind of kept up with Kate Winslet. So
Wow,
can I ask Amy a question?
Sure.
Is it Mare of Easttown? Have we all been saying it wrong?
No, it's Easttown.
Okay. Oh God. Okay.
Mare of Easttown. So
since we're talking about Kate Winslet, one of the things that has been in all the press is about how she, wanted to keep her bulgy bit of belly in the frame. Like, how bulgy? But anyway, what did that mean for editing?
Well, for editing, it meant nothing. I mean, it was just the director trying to be polite and say, do you want me to get rid of this? I mean, it's like every show you work on, it's like there's beauty fixes. I mean, this is not news. It's like men, women, everybody gets a beauty fix. So it kind of
say FYI, there's no budget for that. So
there's no budget for that. Yeah. So it was just, I don't know how like that got picked up on, and of course spun out of control. It was really just Craig Zobel being polite and asking, and Kate was just like, oh, just let it all hang out. But there wasn't one, much to hang out, and two, she was just,
she's
into
perfect.
it. She's perfect.
She's so
into it.
pretty, by the way. Like
Doesn't mean
Zavol.
anything.
What was that? Yeah. Who cares? Like I was
Like,
like, can
who
I look like that
cares?
with no makeup? Shit. Sorry, can I not say that? Sorry.
Okay, you're okay.
Shoot.
That was no. I mean, it's very common. But it did kind of spiral out of control. Like where Craig texted me and he was like, "What can we do about this?" And I was like, "There's nothing. You were being polite. Somebody picked up on it, and then it rolled out of But this is something that happens commonly, and it's not just with women, but it's always just oh, his love handles. Oh,
It's good to know. Good to know.
It's like just zoom in 30%. It's like
I think it was her reaction to it. That
I think so too.
It made people feel better, right?
Yeah, it did. It totally did. It's like, oh, okay, Winslet has bulgy bits. It's like, yeah.
Hey, we all do.
It's like Penelope Cruz has cellulite. It's like, come on, I know all the secrets.
All right, let's move to the secrets of WandaVision. So much fun, so incredible to move through all of those different time periods and so many different aesthetics. It seems like from an editing perspective that they were mostly contained in each episode, although some moving back and forth. So how much of that were you trying to manage in the editing?
I mean, definitely we watched a lot of sitcoms, a lot of the decades, constantly seeing how they would cut the footage together. And it's interesting because as much as we wanted to keep it within the decades, you also have to pace it up for today's audience because they do get bored. And the pace of today is different than the pace of the 50s and 60s and 70s. And I mean, if you watch the Brady Bunch, I did the Brady Bunch episode. And if you watch those episodes, they're not funny. They're actually not that funny. They're, you smile a lot of the time and they're kind of slow at times. But, being Marvel and having a big audience, you got to keep up with what the pace of today is too. And so we were really strategic in how we were supposed to cut that together. And once we get into say like the more Marvel-y kind of stuff and, we change tone because there's something that happens and then it becomes a little bit more Marvel-y and we add push-ins and it becomes more cinematic or we change, aspect ratios. So it was really strategic and we talked about it a lot with our director and the other editors. We all kind of worked together to create this kind of tone throughout all the episodes. It was really fun because at first we were all together and then when the pandemic happened we were all in Zooms, so we were doing a lot of our really fine-tuning during the Zoom sessions, but I think it all came together pretty well.
Is there a moment that you remember editing that just made you feel super proud and excited? Like, hey, I made this thing happen. I pulled this together.
Yeah, there was a moment actually there. In one of my episodes, we have like flashbacks in there, like little like hints that didn't exist. Like till up into the week we delivered, we didn't have that in there. And we had an idea of maybe we should add some footage to help one of the other episodes' motivation down the line. And then, our director pitched something to maybe shoot something like last minute. And then it didn't happen because one of our actresses wasn't available. And so I was like, well, can we record it? And maybe we could do it with audio and add flashes and use that as our motivation. And so that stayed in the show. And I'm like, it's really fun to be able to pitch something and it stay in the show, as well as the entire main title of 105. I did myself. I put it together. We did postcards. We got pictures. Like I had to previs that whole thing myself. I didn't have any help with that. So,
Congratulations.
Watching a lot of we put in family ties moments in there to help kind of tell the story before they went to shoot it. shoot like extra stuff, like the Full House moments and stuff. We added some of that in there, but yeah, that was a challenge. That was probably the most difficult thing I did the entire series. The sitcom stuff is hard, and laugh track is hard. Like for timing, it's so out of my experience, and I had no idea how to make it work properly. And adding it, you have to add a little space to the moments for timing, and so it was a real challenge. And I'm not great at the comedy stuff. It's not part of my history of editing. I'm more like action and sci-fi. So it was really fun to get out of the box out of my range. It was a challenge.
I'm glad that you brought that up about timing, because I actually wanted to ask Susan, comedy is all timing, right? And so what does that, you need that, the actors have to deliver on their timing, but then what does that mean for you as an editor to get that comedic timing right?
It was a real rude awakening when I spent a decade at Grey's Anatomy, which had a lot of comedy in its early years, and then gravitated away from that a little bit. And that's kind of what I was seeking out again. I really missed that. And I loved that part of the show and working with those performances like Sandra Oh and Tiara Knight and Katherine Heigl. They were so funny. And so the first half hour I went to was like a wild, rude awakening. It was so much harder than I thought it would be. It was a show called Grandfathered with John Stamos. And it was just this momentary thing though, where I said to myself that I, had wanted a challenge. I left a place where I, wasn't really feeling challenged after 70 episodes, and I wanted a challenge, and challenges are challenging. And so that's just become a mantra of mine throughout any show that is harder than I expected it to be. I'm like, well, it's a challenge, and that's hard. Challenges are hard. And so it's very much like microscopic editing. It's really, really like, it's so much about like timing and we script scenes because the producers really want to see every single line reading like bam, 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 bam. And it's simply so they can explore just the slightest shades of difference. And I've heard some people describe that of like, oh, it's just lateral moves, just lateral changes. Well, it's still a change. And a phrase that I heard the producers say, the showrunners say, and then it was actually in 108, but got cut out at one point, was talking about, is it 10% funnier? If it's 10%, and it was worth doing if it was 10% funnier. And even if it took a few tricks to make that work, we'd go for it. So, but the thing I really loved about Hacks was that it wasn't just where the dialogue was king or queen, shall I say, but it was really about visual storytelling too. And that was just so awesome. I was on a show called Lodge 49 that also was just like that, extraordinary visual storytelling in the midst of absurd comedy and tragic drama. It was great. And Lucia Aniello, who's one of the co-creators and directed most of the shows of the episodes of Hacks, she really was committed to it looking beautiful, and that the storytelling was beautiful, and not just, just that the dialogue was everything. And the dialogue was really important, but it was so wonderful to be on a show that was also shot so fantastically. And they cited shows like Succession and Better Call Saul, very male dominated shows, as inspirations, both visually and kind of like the epic story we were going to tell with these sort of titans. And yet, their helicopter is a News Channel 5 helicopter, not like some black behemoth going over the Hudson River. And so it was sort of like the funny twist on, on that. And I just loved that perspective. And I was like, yeah, let's make the women's story of Better Call Saul, let's do it. So anyway, so it was also, they were very, very attenuated to keeping things real as well. And some characters that's harder than others. This amazing character, Kayla, just leapt off the page when I read her character. I was just like, she's amazing. And then when I saw her, I just was stunned, and she was so funny. And I didn't know she was already like Twitter famous or something, but she and Paul Downs, who's also one of our co-creators and then is in the show as the manager, Jimmy, they would just improv like crazy. And it was really easy to go off the rails with them and just do these totally absurd cuts of scenes. But then we'd like dial it back. So there's a really amazing scene between the two of them in the finale that's coming up that, you know, my first pass, I was like, I just went for all their bananas takes. And then we really, really like refined it. So it just really rode this line between absurdity and yet like, like, what is happening in this scene between the two of them? And it was really fun to mine that tone, you know, and I don't know, just see how that creates tension, comedic tension too.
Yeah. When you talk about beauty, I agree that Hacks is beautiful. But the word that really, for me, sums up so much of Underground Railroad is beauty, like in every sense of the word. I was a huge fan coming in, and I was moved in a way that I just didn't imagine I ever would be. It's such an important, complex, wonderful, so many words. And I can only imagine that a lot of that is you, Joi. Like you brought that. I mean, Barry is Barry. He's a king. But the magical realism and the way that it is on screen, and the pacing of it, I think, is really what caught me. Like it's fast and then it's so deep. How did you make that happen?
It's funny listening to Susan and Nona speak. I was coming off of Zola, so I was kind of like dark comedy, quick cuts, Twitter feed, headspace, and then transitioning into Underground. I was like, oh, okay, I'm back with Barry. So I gotta figure the tone, figure the balance. But it's one of those things where, you know, I've known Barry and James Laxton, our cinematographer, since film school. So we've been working with each other for quite some time. And it has kind of developed into a bit of shorthand where when I get dailies, I can see their intent and what they're, you know, how they actually want, you know, the scene to be approached. And the thing that I love about Barry too is he's so collaborative. And he's not afraid to say, Joi, you're right. You know, which, you know, some directors might be afraid to say that, but he's not afraid to say that. And also he's not afraid to break things. Like, you know, there were a few scenes where they were good. And Barry's like, and I'm like, what? I'm like, what do you want to try? And he was like, I don't want to break it, but let's break it. And, you know, and breaking it is where you find the beauty. And that's one of the things I love about the process when I'm working with him is that, yes, you need to break things. And yes, you need to go further than you sometimes feel like you're physically able to do, just so you can really fully realize what the project is supposed to be. And, you know, working on this during the pandemic and not having that outlet to go, you know, grab a drink with girlfriends and chat and say, you know, let me tell you about my day, but kind of being sequestered and going from work to home, it was a lot. But I think we found camaraderie amongst each other through the process. And we really learned a lot on this one. So I'm really proud that we were able to create.
I read somewhere that you edited episode 1 and 10 first and then did the middle. Is that common? Like, is that common for you? Is that common in the field?
No, because I'm so used to working on features. This is my first time doing a series, and, you know, hats off to you ladies who do series day in and day out, because I'm just like, you know, you finish dailies on chapter 1 and you're like, 5 more chapters? Like, it's a lot of work. But yeah, that process of like getting through dailies and seeing 4 other episodes waiting for you to go through dailies, it can be a bit overwhelming. But chapter 1 and chapter 10 were shot in the same location. So I was splitting my time between both to stay up with camera. And it was actually the ending that kind of informed us on what the beginning wanted to be. You know, we really realized how integral a part Mabel is, who is Cora's mom, in the actual journey of Cora's story. And so when we figured out Mabel's journey, we were like, we need to weave her in throughout the rest of these episodes. And so we introduced flashbacks that weren't originally scripted. And we wanted the audience to be aware of who Mabel was. So when you got to that last episode, it was kind of not only an aha moment, but you were invested in what actually happened with Mabel.
I'm going to move on to Michelle and the Queen's Gambit. I'm so curious to know how you made chess look so good for so long. Like, you're editing the game over and over and over again, and every time I wanted to watch it.
Well, gosh, everybody asks that question. I think it's mostly because people are just surprised at how much they're okay. They had such low expectations for a show with chess. I mean, when I would tell people what I was working on, they'd fall asleep by the middle of the sentence. And so I think that, because of this challenge that people thought was going to be a challenge, I think everyone from the top down wanted to make sure that every which way that we were representing the game, that it was something new or that it represented something else other than chess. Because really, we knew we were showing it to people who weren't going to know all the intricacies of the different moves. So what had to be important was the story and the drama and her journey. So I think that I guess the answer is everyone knew that everything had to be cool and different, so they brought their A game. And I think that I, being not a huge chess fan necessarily, I mean, I know how what all the moves are and everything. I mean, I brought that sort of, ignorance to it to say, well, what would make this exciting for me to watch? And if it worked for me, then it must work for some people out there. So, and I also was just more interested in the other things going on in the scenes.
Right. So we really are, watching Beth grow up on screen. Was there sort of a single idea or focus you had when you were helping to build that character through the editing?
Well, I think, from the very beginning, Scott, our director writer, told us that our hypothesis and what this story was about is the cost of genius. So I think that, that theme rides through everything. She's always battling two things, even when she's younger, right? And you see it happening from the beginning when she's not aware of it, and then it just kind of continues between the dark side of maybe addiction and not having anybody, and but having this one thing that she's very good at, and trying to sort of balance that. And now I forgot where I was going with that, but but I would say that was the main thing that we were all thinking about.
Yeah, well, that definitely comes through, and it works. I have so much I want to ask all of you, but I see that we're getting towards the end of the session. So I'm going to jump to Rosanne. And since you and Nona are on together, Rosanne, I just want to ask this question. Is there any conversation between the different Marvel worlds, around any kind of continuity or?
Yeah, I mean, the producers that we have on the show kind of would tell us, if something it's okay, we need to make sure this beat is hitting because it's doing that. But usually I think we don't discuss outside of our team. I mean, it's lovely to see Nona down the hallway, but it's NDA. We're like tight lip and we don't talk about it. But as far as within our producers, the good thing is we work with Kevin Feige, Lou, and Victoria, who are like the brains of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. So it's usually going through them, and then when they give us notes, it's like, no, we need to make sure this little Easter egg hits here, or it's there's that, and also within that, we have to make sure our characters stay true to what was created, because that's the thing coming into this, Falcon and Winter Soldier. These are characters that are existed in the Marvel universe, and with a crazy, insane amount of fans that, I think since the Endgame, everybody's like, oh my gosh, what's next? So I think coming into it, we have to make sure we honor it. And I was watching all the movies and, making sure that when the dailies came in, and I honored that. And also, while working with producers, we made sure the stories are all, and then also there's new stories to tell with that too. But as far as for me, I think, coming in and cutting such a big action thing, it was exciting. And I don't know about the rest of you, but you've heard before, oh, can women cut action? I think, moving up in the world, I've heard that before, where it's like, no, I'm here and I grew up watching action. I've cut action in previous shows. I'm going to do this. And it was exciting. And it was just the different episodes. And I was at episode 3 and 6, and I got to do a lot of action pieces. I'm really proud of like this, like if I wanted explosion, I can actually talk to the effects and kind of make this even more, or talk to the producers like, hey, how can we make this even bigger? But anyways, it's exciting. And yeah, existing characters, we just have to make sure that these are true to what was created in the Marvel universe.
So how is this different from other things you've edited in the past?
Well, I've done horror, I've done mind-bending hacking type of shows, and I've also done dramas where there's barely any VFX. I think the one big difference here is I think we had a giant set of tools with VFX. I think that was the big learning curve for me coming in, is the idea of being, pre-viz and also post-viz. Post-viz is basically when you have something and you get effects done by some people, like, putting shields in or putting effects in to actually help tell the story. Again, everything is about telling the best story, but I think the tools are slightly different. And also I think being a fan of Marvel movies coming in, I just want to make sure, again, I do a good job. And then also talking to the various teams, because the teams are huge, right, Nona? It's like you have this gigantic.
They're massive.
And yeah, we're all.
I don't know everyone's names either. No, I'm kidding. I mean, the VFX teams are so big. I mean, to be quite honest, like I don't know everybody on those teams because there's just too many people on them, and you're like, what do you do? Like, you don't know what they do either because they're in a different department. But it's kind of amazing how we combine the work, like editorial and VFX, and we make these worlds. Like, I don't know how it gets all done, but it does. Yeah, a lot of hours. Everybody's working a lot of hours to get these shows out.
Yeah, it's a massive, massive collaboration, and just the amount of teamwork that is involved is huge. Just getting a shot together, and sometimes you're like, how many people worked on this? And then you look at the credits, like that's why we have 10-minute credits, right? Every Marvel episode, it's like, oh wow, okay, there's like 10 minutes of credits because there are amazing amount of people that worked on it. So,
well, one of our programs is Reframe. It's a collaboration between WIF and the Sundance Institute, and we award the Reframe stamp to films and TV shows that have gender balanced productions. And when we start looking at the shows with deep VFX staff crews, it's a lot. It's a lot.
It's so many. And then even within editorial, we have first assistants and second assistants, and it's a massive team, and it takes everyone involved to get everything. And I feel like without it, I don't think we would be able to do that. We have, just everybody's involved. And I think the other thing that I learned that's very different from other shows, it's, a lot of things are done after the fact. So for example, if you want VFX or if you want something, it's like, it's going to look better, we're going to do it at the end. Here it's an ongoing thing. We have to make sure that it's constantly evolving. And if something doesn't work, put it aside and we start anew. And if we want a shot, let's pre-visit, and then it starts on a path of actually making the shot work. And again, you work with what you have. It's all about telling the story. And it's massive difference. But ultimately, we have to make sure people care about the characters. So if the story isn't working, then it doesn't matter what, all the flashy stuff. But at the end, it's like, well, let's make people care about, Sam Wilson becoming Captain America. So, yeah.
So, Shelly, Halston is a pretty flashy show, but I'm wondering if there are VFX in it.
there's a few. There are a lot of wig fixes and
Yeah.
hundreds of them.
My real question is, it's such a vibrant, vivid story and world. How did you, how did you bring that together and sort of do it justice?
I got to go to New York for the show, so I started in New York in January 2020, and the other editor, there were just two of us, is my dear friend Shelby Siegel. We came up as assistants together in the 90s. And so we made a decision early on, knowing that it is a complicated show and it was all block shot and cross-boarded, and that we were going to share every episode. So I would take first position on like 1, 3, and 5, and she would take 2 and 4, but we shared every episode. We all watched all the dailies. We were lucky enough to be in a facility. We weren't working from home. So we would stand in each other's doorways with our masks on. And Shelby was like the story monitor. And I was like, oh, but I like that lens flare. And I like the way he moves this piece of fabric. And she's like, no, it has to be this part of the story. And so we just had this great collaboration. And part of that is we've known each other for 25 years. And it was the first time we ever worked together. And we just were very honest and open. And some scenes that I maybe struggled with, I'd pass over to her and vice versa. It's the most collaborative experience that I've ever had. And it carried through to not just picture editing, but the sound creation. The Ryan Murphy world is very demanding with sound. And I would say the rest of the team had not had that kind of training or exposure. So I was kind of leading the charge with kind of creating soundscape. Also score, like a lot of people don't really understand that as editors, we're kind of doing all of that. We were temping to get the right vibe, and we work with the composer very early on. Episode 1, we're working with him, but I mean, we tried hundreds of things to get the right kind of flow and vibe, and it was constant because Halston went from the 70s to the 80s, so there was a little bit of shift in how things changed and evolved. But really, we had such rich production design and costumes and hair and makeup. Like it was just so much fun to get dailies every day. But it was really a really hard show.
But you've worked on Ryan Murphy shows before.
Yeah.
How is this one different?
This one was a little bit different in, the schedule one was nuts. We had very little time to get 5 episodes. We had one director for all 5 episodes, which was great. The long distance thing was kind of tricky because we were in New York and they were in LA. So there were a lot of, I don't get notes till 10 o'clock Eastern time kind of thing. So that was kind of tricky. I think just story-wise, it was a little bit difficult because Halston was so flashy and famous, but trying to find the real emotional core to the story and really playing up those relationships he had with all of those around him, with Liza Minnelli and his illustrator. And so I think that was the trickiest for us, was really finding emotional beats, creating emotional beats. There's some scenes that we just, he's always in like the same kind of costume and he's got the red jacket on, so you could use it for any other scene. And so kind of stealing bits here and there to really kind of try and feel Halston's emotion.
I love that you talked about collaboration and what it was like to work with another female editor, and other people have touched on collaboration and mentorship and apprenticeship and supporting our colleagues in the next generation. That's how we're going to get to equity, all like all those pieces, and you're doing it. So I want to say thank you for all the work you've done, for being here and part of this conversation. Can't wait to see what you all do next. I know it's going to be amazing. So thank you.